welcome everyone. Sorry we're late. We're just trying to get everybody in. It seems like people are late, but we're recording this meeting. And if you'd like to get some pointers from it later, you can just drop us an email and we'd be happy to share. So this is a meeting hosted by African Leaders in Aviation in partnership with FlyFOFA. We'll give a chance for introductions to everyone. But what I just want to give, a point that I just want to give, we set up webinar meetings based on the requests we get on social media. So a lot of people have been requesting, how do I become a commercial pilot? How do I go ahead with finding a flight school? Because it's not information that's readily available like universities. You know where the universities are, you know how the applications go about. So we just want to push that information and enlighten people about how to get started in a flight school and how to choose a flight school. And FlyFOFA was happy to join us and share this information with us. So I'm Kotani Davana. I'm representing African Leaders in Aviation and happy to see you all. And I'll go around and ask for Palesa and Nyasha to introduce themselves, starting with Nyasha.
Thank you, Kodani. Hi, everyone. I'm Nyasha Manyika, co-founder of African Leaders in Aviation, created by Kodani and I. We're trying to promote the aviation sector within the African continent, not only for people to become pilots, but for even the knowledge of like the other different aviation career sectors to also be known. Some people don't know they can actually become aviation doctors. They don't know they can become aviation lawyers. They don't know they can become environmentalists for Airbus, for Boeing. We're just trying to let that knowledge go out there that being in the aviation field is not just being a pilot. You can join actually in any field. And for today, we've invited FlyFOFA, as Kodani has said, so they can let us know the journey of becoming a pilot and being at FlyFOFA as a student pilot. Thank you, Kodani.
Thank you, Nyasha, and for just that brief background on what African Leaders in Aviation is about. And over to you, Palesa. Please briefly introduce yourself. What is FlyFOFA? What's the organization about?
Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Palesa Khoza. I'm the acting chief flight instructor at FlyFOFA Aviation Training. FlyFOFA is one of the few Black-owned flight schools within South Africa. We provide aviation training from the student pilot's license all the way to commercial pilot's license. And we also provide ATPL ground school as well as ATPL training. What FlyFOFA Aviation Training is all about is about trying to make sure that African problems are solved with an African solution. FlyFOFA Aviation Training is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, who are the owners, like I just mentioned, of the flight school, and they've been running and operating since 2012. And yeah, that's basically what we're about.
Thank you, Palesa. I think what's so exciting about FlyFOFA is the African representation. To hear that it's African bred and run by African people, it's really exciting. And that's what we African Leaders in Aviation are about. So without wasting time, Palesa, please get right into it. Your programs, your courses, how long does it take, the requirements, because that's the big, what most people ask, what is required for me to become a commercial pilot license holder?
Awesome stuff. So basically, flight training is all about flight training. So most people are excited and eager to become pilots, and they never fully understand the procedure and what it takes to become a pilot. As Nyasha just mentioned, you can become an aviation doctor, and an aviation doctor is basically what is required to confirm whether you are suitable to become a pilot. So before you start or you get your student pilot's license, of which a student pilot's license is like a learner's license for aviation. Before you get into it, you need to get what is known as a medical certificate. This is my medical certificate, which usually comes attached with this yellow slip, which needs to be sent down to the Civil Aviation Authority. What this medical certificate basically says is that I, as a pilot, am valid to get into an aircraft and fly without endangering any of my passengers, or in my case, any of my students. Once you've managed to obtain a medical to confirm that you are a healthy citizen, you then apply for what is known as a student pilot's license. Like I mentioned, your student pilot's license is similar to a learner's license, which you require before you can actually start your flying. From there, you require approximately 45 hours of training. And I say approximately because depending on your ability to fly and your ability to pass your exams, it might be more. Nevertheless, because 45 hours is the requirement from the Civil Aviation Authority. But generally, it does increase to sometimes more than that. And 45 hours of that flight training includes 25 to 30 hours of flying with an instructor, whereby you'll be sitting in an aircraft with side by side with someone like myself, and you as the student doing the initial phases of training. Once you've studied, or rather once you've done your 40, your 30 to your 25 to 30 hours of training, you then move on to what we call solo flying. Personally, I think everyone who's genuinely interested in aviation finds that section as the most exciting, because now it gives you the opportunity to take off and land all by yourself with nobody in the aircraft. It basically gives you the freedom and almost convinces you that you are the pilot. That's about 10 hours of flying. Once you've done that, you move on to cross-country flying. Cross-country flying is where you take the aircraft and you fly from one town to another. In Gauteng, we usually do a flight from Pretoria, maybe to Germiston, then from Germiston to Potchefstroom and back as part of your training. And then from there, you are able to test with a designated flight examiner, who's then able to qualify you as a private pilot holder. I don't know if Kodani has her PPL license with her, so she can show you what the license actually looks like. There we go. And that basically is what you'd obtain to become a private pilot license holder. And as a private pilot holder, you are unable to get paid for any of the flights you do. Basically, this is the license that you have to just enjoy flying and take your parents around, particularly for general aviation. And when we talk about general aviation, we talk about just being able to take off and land and do private flights, basically from one town to another on a generally small or light aircraft. Then once you've completed your private pilot's license, what you then are expected to obtain is what is known as a night rating. For the night rating, on average, we take about a week to 2 weeks to do the training. It involves an exam. Oh yes, another thing I forgot to mention. With your private pilot's license, you're expected to write 8 exams, of which the pass mark is 75%. You are not able to test your PPL practical unless you've written those exams and there's evidence that you've written and passed those exams. And then once you've completed your private pilot's license, you then move on to what is known as a night rating. What a night rating does is it gives you the ability to fly after hours. With the PPL, you cannot fly in cloud, you cannot fly in the dark. However, with your night rating, we start incorporating or start involving you as the student with what is required to be able to fly once the sun sets safely, and to make sure that you never encounter any challenges or difficulties. Night rating, like I mentioned, on average takes about a week to 2 weeks. This is weather dependent. This is aircraft serviceability dependent. It all depends on your availability as well. If you're unavailable every day on a day-to-day basis, then obviously the duration of the training is extended, whether for the PPL or the night rating. Once you've written your night rating exam and you've done the training, it's 10 hours of training, 5 hours in a simulator and 5 hours in the actual aircraft. A simulator is basically equipment that's required by the CAA for you to actually sit down and simulate flight training. It's a specific type of equipment, so you can't use your own laptop or computer and assume that the training would have been conducted. So basically, if you're sitting at home and you do have your own personal simulator, that is the best way to start practicing for any type of flying, and from there it becomes easier for you to move on to our aircrafts that we have here. excuse me, once you've conducted the training and you've written your practical exam, it then becomes a check ride. So for every segment of training that you do, there's always a check ride. Basically, in the check ride, they want to confirm and identify that you have practiced all the lessons and you are capable of handling the aircraft safely on your own. Most important thing with aviation is safety, safety, safety all the time. Remember, with flying, it's not like being in a car where you're able to stop on the side of the road and get assistance. So it is important that you are fully aware of what it requires for you to be able to recover from emergency situations during the day and at night. And once you've conducted your night rating, you then move on to your commercial pilot's license training. In the interim of you doing your night rating as well as obtaining your commercial pilot's license, there's another 10 exams that you need to write. So you'll notice how it's a very rigorous situation with respect to the exams that you need to write and the pass mark being 75%. But however, you are able to sit down and write those exams. Unfortunately, CAA has given stipulations where you're able to sit down and write the exam if you have not passed. For example, if you don't get 75%, you are able to rewrite the exam within 7 days, if I'm not mistaken. If you get below 50%, then you are banned from writing the exam for about 2 months. So there are ways and means for you to eventually be able to pass the exam. Obviously, the last thing you want is to keep repeating the same exam about 200 times. So if you get to a point where you realize you're struggling, FlyFOFA Aviation Training provides ground school and extra tutorial sessions to assist you with that side of things. While you're doing your exams, there's our building, which again is one of the most exciting parts of training. You basically can hire an aircraft and fly wherever. Kodani, who's been attempting to do a huge cross-country flight, and I say attempting because every now and again the weather comes up, and then last year as she was trying to do the flight, Corona happened, and so it's just a couple of things that always go into your planning of your flying. That sort of slow you down or speed up the process. There's a lot that goes into it. So with respect to our building, we provide our aircrafts, and you as a student are able to come in, hire the aircraft. And of course, we need to make sure that you do have a valid private pilot's license. You do have a valid night rating, and we do sign you out. The sign out usually takes about 30 to 45 minutes with a senior instructor like myself, where we just confirm that you are safe to fly. You can do a couple of takeoffs and landings within within the 90 days. So basically what the CAA states is that every 90 days, you must make sure that you take off and land 3 takeoffs and 3 landings. So as a student pilot, before obtaining your commercial pilot's license, that has to be done with an instructor, so myself. And that's where that part of your our building comes into play, where you have to keep recurrent to make sure that you're able to take off and land safely without endangering yourself. Once you're at about 95 hours of pilot in command time being your own solo flying, you then begin with your instrument rating training. Instrument rating training basically involves mainly only focusing on the flight instruments. And when we talk about flight instruments, we're talking about what is known as the 6-pack. And I mean, some of the terms I'm mentioning here, you can Google and you would be able to find out what these instruments look like and be able to get better information about some of the terms that I've mentioned here. Instrument flight training takes about 40 hours, of which 10 of those hours were already covered in your night rating training. So on average, you're looking at 30 hours and maybe even more, again, depending on your availability, depending on the aircraft availability, depending on the weather. It involves a lot. It's not just straightforward as in walking into a lecture in university where you're always hoping there's a lecturer available all throughout the day. So once you've done your 30 hours, or correction, your 40 hours of instrument training, you then do an oral exam where you sit down with a designated flight examiner. A designated flight examiner being either, or correction, is usually somebody who has the highest rank as a pilot, and that's usually somebody who has 4 bars. They then sit and test you, and you go through an oral exam, and then you do a practical, usually on a multi-engined aircraft or a single-engine aircraft, depending on your affordability. You then obtain, once you have the commercial pilot's license, you then have the ability to do flights where you'll be paid for them. So you're then able to operate as a paid pilot. However, here's the interesting thing. Once you have your commercial pilot's license, it will depend on where you get a job. So for example, myself, I've then become an instructor after obtaining my commercial pilot's license. The option that I chose, or the option that was readily available to me, was to become an instructor. Most airlines, specifically in South Africa, require you to have on average 1,500 hours. And I think this is one of the major things that most people are not aware of. Everybody always assumes that once you have a commercial pilot's license, then you can automatically get into an airline. So you still have to try and acquire 1,500 hours of experience. And in my case, like I've just mentioned, I've chosen the instructor's route. And the instructor's route, you basically do about 6 months worth of training where you are rigorously tested to identify if you do understand the theoretical knowledge. Are you able to give briefings, and are you able to teach somebody else how to actually take off and land on their own, from 0 hours of flying to a commercial pilot's license holder? On average, you're looking at about 200 to 250 hours of flight time when you get your commercial pilot's license. And thereafter, depending on where you get employed, and like Nyasha mentioned, it's very important to be aware that aviation is a very, very, very broad industry. You could become a crop duster, you could become a bush pilot, you could become a medevac pilot, where you're basically transporting people who require medical assistance from one point to another. You can become a charter pilot. You can become a what do you call this? An airline pilot. You can become a contract pilot. Basically, you have different types of contract flying, where you'll either be in the bush, or you can be with a commercial company. For example, you get companies that transport the likes of the Oppenheimers, or the likes of your Ackerman, the owners of these big companies. So there's a lot that you can come across as a pilot. It also depends on availability in terms of jobs. That comes as a result of the market, obviously market and demand. So for example, currently with the coronavirus, the demand for pilots has sort of shrunk slightly, which is causing a lot of people to be uncomfortable. Obviously, a lot of airlines have had to close down and reduce their operations. However, I need to really, really stress this. People should not assume that because coronavirus is happening, that aviation will not pick up. It's definitely going to pick back up. For example, last year and the year before last, they were forecasting a major pilot shortage. Now, if there's a major pilot shortage that was happening last year, it then means that once once airlines come back online, there's going to be an even bigger gap, because the large number of people that were able to actually operate then become retrenched, and not all of them are able to go back into flying once things open up. So definitely, I will implore everyone not to give up on aviation just because things have slowed down. Very, very importantly, do come back if you feel, or rather do join the aviation sector if you do feel you're passionate and determined to become a pilot, which is the two most important things. I think a lot of people assume that because it's the most expensive thing, it becomes almost impossible to become a pilot. Yes, aviation is expensive. We're looking at costs of approximately 150,000 Rand to become a private pilot license holder. However, with determination and discipline, nothing is impossible. Nothing, absolutely nothing is impossible. So Dani, over to you.
Thank you so much, Palesa. A lot of information all at one go. We will have a Q&A session now. Please, this is the platform you get to learn all you need to learn. And we will also open up our emails to receive more questions after the session. So I have about 3 questions that I have down to start off our Q&A session. You talked about it takes about 90 hours, 40 hours. Can it take longer, Palesa, to get to your target, be it PPL, CPL, ATPL instructor? And if it does take longer, what are the consequences thereof? Is it possible? Will CAA kick you out? please take us through if we don't get it by 250 hours, what then happens to your license, or does it influence how people will hire you or not?
Wow, thanks, Kodani. That's actually a very pertinent question, particularly to people who know nothing about aviation. So what the CAA, I keep mentioning CAA is the Civil Aviation Authority, and basically they are the governing body for all our licenses within South Africa. As you might have picked up, it states over there, Civil Aviation Authority on the licenses. So what the CAA has stipulated is specifically for going solo. Like I mentioned earlier, there's this phase of training where you have to go solo. Basically, what the CAA has stipulated is that on average, and on average, I'm talking about people who have some level of exposure to aviation, is that they would go solo at about 13 to 15 hours of flight training. Now, 13 to 15 hours is genuinely a very low bar. However, once the student, obviously, if the student is not solo at 13 to 15 hours, that does not mean that the student may never be a successful pilot. So what the CAA has done is that they've put up a legislation which states that once you get to 30 hours and you have not gone solo, where solo flight, the initial solo flight is where you take off and land the aircraft solely on your own without an instructor in the aircraft. Once you get to 30 flying hours of training and you have not gone solo, a senior instructor has to test you. For example, a grade 2 instructor or myself. If the grade 2 or the CFI, if the grade 2 instructor or the CFI, chief flight instructor, tests you and they find that there's not anything particularly wrong with your flying, then potentially you continue with that chief flight instructor. If, however, the senior instructor tests you and they discover there is something fundamentally that they are not able to identify or correct, a designated flight examiner then comes into the picture. Now, with instruction, you get a grade 3 instructor, who's the most junior, then you get a grade 2 instructor, who's the most, or rather intermediate, and then you get a DFE or a grade 1 instructor. Once the designated flight examiner comes in to test you and they discover that there isn't anything fundamentally wrong with your flying, perhaps you're just not flying consistently enough. For example, if you are learning to ride a bicycle, you'll notice the more often you ride a bicycle, the more better you become, the more accustomed to the sensations you become. So there is possibilities where you're not flying every day and you're not consistent, either because of finances or because of aircraft availability, or because you're just you're a working person. Those are some of the circumstances that would put you in a position where you're unable to actually get to the solo before the 30 hours. If the designated examiner comes in and he discovers that actually you can continue, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with you. And when I say fundamentally wrong with you, it's challenges like the inability to identify danger or the inability to respond when a situation gets really drastic and dire. Those are some of the things that would actually cause a person not to be able to go solo. Like I mentioned, in the sky, you need to be completely aware of your surroundings, unlike when you're driving a car. When you're driving a car, you know, sometimes you drive, and because it's become so mechanical, you're able to get from one point to the other without even realizing. So in the sky, it's very imperative that you are situationally aware at all times, that you are aware of your surroundings. So if you get to about 40 hours, 35 to 40 hours, and the examiner deems you safe to actually continue flying, then you are able to continue your flight training until you go solo. Once you've done that flight training, you then move on to your the rest of your training to obtain your private pilot's license. If the designated examiner tests you and identifies that you actually are an unsafe pilot, like I mentioned earlier, sorry, okay, there we go. Like I mentioned earlier, it has to do with your safety. So if the designated flight examiner notices that there's more about your circumstances that require you not to continue flying, that just simply means that at this point, you might not be able to go solo. However, there are other avenues for you to actually continue within the aviation industry. So I've never really come across anybody who's been told they can't continue flying because they are unsafe or whatever the case might be. However, if you do get to the 30 or 35 hours, it's not necessarily the end of the road. You will get tested by most senior pilot in the aviation industry. And then from there, if you do discover that you are not able to fly an aircraft, there's always other avenues to remain within the aviation industry. You get drone pilots, you get aviation lawyers, you get medical aviation doctors, etc., etc. And then past the solo, you then have the opportunity to complete the rest of your training to become a private pilot license holder. Then at that point, there's another check ride that needs to be done, of which if you are at 80 hours or above, and there is again a need for a designated flight examiner to come in, then a DFE will be called in. However, with the PPL, it depends on what the senior instructor at the flight school does. If the senior instructor at the flight school believes that there isn't any danger with your flying, and perhaps the reason you've taken so long to be able to achieve your private pilot's license has more to do with your finances, or that you weren't able to be consistent with your flying, then they are able to sign you out and test you to give you a private license, your PPL. After that point, it's more about your ability to do instrument flying. At that point, once you've gotten your PPL, there's no restriction as to how many hours you get once you get your commercial pilot's license. So for example, if you do get your commercial pilot's license at a slightly higher amount, to some degree, it serves as a benefit on your part, in the sense that a lot of companies want to look at somebody who's got more flying experience in terms of hours. So to a larger degree, if you have about 300 hours once you get your PPL, or correction, your commercial pilot's license, depending on how or why there was a delay, will determine how the airline or the company responds to you. So for example, if you have a higher number of hours simply because you opted to fly more hour building, then it wouldn't be a problem. However, if you have more hours because you had challenges in between, then they obviously start checking and trying to identify what the situation was. Are you capable of flying now? Is the issue that you were facing at the time still something you're struggling with? Or are you able to continue with working for them? Another thing that companies use to identify if you're a suitable candidate is what is known as psychometric exams. Psychometric exams basically identify your character, they identify the type of responses you'd have to certain situations, etc., etc. So psychometrics are a very big thing once you get into job searching. So it's something to look out for, something to sort of gauge from the companies whether you're suitable character for that company, or what are your responses to danger? Do you work well under pressure? Do you struggle with depression, etc., etc.?
Thank you, Palesa, for that. And just one pointer that I'd like to add on is that the beautiful thing about building your hours carry over. So say you're supposed to finish your PPL at 90 hours and you finish at 120. That will be credited for your commercial pilot license hours. You don't forfeit the extra hours that you added on to your hour building. Thank you, Palesa. I see questions coming through from Anna. Her first question is, are there any minimum requirements to be able to enroll in the aviation training? I'll give it over to Palesa, but I think she started off with explaining the process from the medical certificate, getting your CPL. Palesa, can you please just clarify that for Anna, please?
Hi again, Anna. On average, and I say on average because once you get your commercial pilot's license, then your requirements become a little bit interesting. So technically speaking, you don't necessarily need any other requirements except your medical license, as well as a student pilot's license and money. However, once you qualify as a commercial pilot, they have a tendency of wanting to look at your high school certificates to try and identify how well you passed your maths and your science. In terms of funding, which is the next question I see that you asked here, funders always want to identify what your matric was. When you were in high school, it becomes difficult for you to get funding to do your training grades, and you didn't do maths and science. That does not stop you from being able to become a pilot. it does become a little bit challenging in terms of your ability to understand some of the information that's been transferred to you during the training. However, like I mentioned, if you have discipline and determination, it is very much doable. Not all pilots studied maths and science, and that doesn't mean they are not competent. It simply means they didn't have the sort of the early foundation to the training that happens within the aviation industry. And then in terms of funding, sorry, Kodani, I'm just going to continue and add on to Anna's second question. In terms of funding within South Africa, there's the Civil Aviation Authority, they give out bursaries. There's TITA, they also give out bursaries. And then there's overseas, there's companies that always give out sponsorships. And I think Kodani might be able to add on to that in terms of the numerous companies that are able to give out funding to do your aviation training.
Yes, Palesa, thank you for covering all her questions. With sponsorship, I think I'll give over to Nyasha briefly, because for this session, we just want to focus on getting into flight schools, your requirements. We do have a session planned on how to apply, which scholarships are available. And we made this platform available because this information is so hidden, and we're trying to just push the information out, especially in the African aviation industry. The information with regards to sponsorship, getting into flight training, it's not so readily available. So we will have a session where we will explain in detail. Nyasha will just briefly explain the scholarships, which are available, how they require you to apply for them. Nyasha, please, over to you.
Thank you, Kodani. Regarding scholarships, I'm just going to talk about just on an international scale. There are organizations such as Women in Aviation International. They have scholarships which are available to both male and females. You can apply. There's some scholarships which come from Jefferson. They've got a scholarship for someone who's starting their initial training. AOPA, organizations like that, they're all listed. Usually Women in Aviation publish their scholarships from July until November every year. There are organizations such as the 99s, Women in Corporate Aviation. Sometimes it's just good to just search like aviation scholarships and you actually see what's out there. And also even approaching your local governments, whichever country you're in, because you'll find out that maybe you're in Tanzania, the Department of Transport there actually has scholarships available, but maybe they send students to university. Maybe no one has ever approached them that I want to try a flight training course. So the good thing is, the other thing you need to do is just knock on the doors, you know, find out what government scholarships are there, visit your civil aviation, find out which scholarships or bursaries that they also have. So you just need to do your research, but Google is your friend, and just find out, network. Go to your local airport, visit the flight school there, talk to the people, find out how they got to where they are. Some people have been sponsored by individuals, others have been sponsored by flying clubs. Others have even gone to a flying school, offered their time to clean airplanes, refuel planes, or even work in ops in exchange for flight hours. So yeah, do your research, go to the airport. That's what I always say. If you want to fly, if you want to get into aviation, go to the airport. You can't be at home and say, I want to fly. Go to your local airport. Thanks, Cody.
Thank you, Nyasha, for that. And I guess everyone in here has a head start because African Leaders in Aviation pushes out this information. On our socials, we always, whenever a scholarship is out, either international or local, being in the African continent, when I say local, because we focus on Africa, we push out that information and our emails are open. Any questions with regards to how to apply, we've assisted some students to apply for scholarships. We even mentor students, a good 20 or so, 15, 20. We are mentoring them, helping them how to get ahead in this industry. So keep your ears on the ground, research. You can't just, like Nyasha said, you can't just sit at home and say, I want to be a pilot. To the next question from Cardio, I see, can I enroll my 10-year-old son to an aviation school? Palesa, please take us through the age requirements for.
Cardio, that is actually a very brilliant question, which is something I completely forgot to mention within my entire briefing. So you cannot enroll your 10-year-old son into a flight school, into aviation training. The age requirements to get a student pilot's license is 16, and to get your private pilot's license is 17, and the minimum age to get your commercial pilot's license is 18. However, it is not frowned upon to take 10-year-olds to the airport to get them familiar with the environment, to get them to do intro flights. Our flight school, FlyFOFA Aviation Training, offers intro flights every weekend, every day of the week. You can just contact us and you'd be able to arrange an introductory flight where an instructor takes you up for a 30 minutes to an hour flight, and the child can then be exposed to something that they might not have known they're interested in doing in the first place. Like Nyasha mentioned, very, very important. Go to your local airport. Go to the most important thing is to actually leave your confines of the home and actually go find out from people that you believe have what it takes for you to get to where you want to be. Like Kodani also mentioned mentorship. Find somebody who's within the sector that you'd like to be in, like, for example, pilots. Find pilots who look like you, who you feel most comfortable with. And that's one of the best parts about FlyFOFA Aviation Training. We provide good quality training from an environment where we're Africans and we're not, there's no issue of fear or discomfort. I know a lot of the times with from the Black culture or Black cultural environment, you know, there's a bit of a challenge when you're then communicating with somebody of the opposite race and you find people get shy or they get afraid. Here, we literally females, we've got female pilots, we've got male pilots, and we've got people who are able to communicate with you in a tongue or a language that you'd be able to understand better, which is brilliant, which helps and aids your training to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Palesa. I see we missed just one question from Anna. She asked about the significance of the bars. Please take that, Palesa.
No problem. Yes, and yeah, I see your question. So within aviation training, like within other sectors of, for example, military and your pilots within the Marines, with pilots, you have the first stripe, which is 1 bar on your epaulets. That usually means that you've now gone solo. So you've obtained the first and most important stage of your flight training, the ability to take off and land craft on your own. Then you get the second stripe, which is what Kodani has, and that's what you obtain once you have a private pilot's license. Then you get the third stripe, which is what I have, and that's what you obtain once you get your commercial pilot's license. And then you get a fourth stripe. Fourth stripe is what you obtain once you have your airline transport pilot's license, which you are able to obtain once you have 1,500 hours of flying, as well as 6 exams where the pass mark again is 75%. Now, very important to note, depending on where you'd be operating will depend on which stripes you're able to wear. So for example, now that I have my commercial pilot's license, I'm able to wear my 3 stripes at the flight school as an instructor. However, if I were to get a job within an airline or a charter company, I'd then be required to wear 2 stripes. Now, that does not necessarily indicate that I'm no longer a commercial pilot's license holder. It just explains the rank within that specific company. So, for example, you are able to find an airline captain who had 4 stripes within that airline, now has to wear 3 stripes within a different airline because now they are now a first officer. So first officer just basically means you're no longer sitting on the left seat of your flight training. Again, important thing to note is that when you're doing your flight training from the get-go, you'll be sitting on the left side of the aircraft to do all your training.
Thank you, Palesa. I hope that was clear. If anything you didn't understand or need more clarity, we will be sharing our email addresses and be happy to explain everything to you again. So this is a Q&A session. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. We have about 10 minutes left of the session. We're still open for Q&A. So I just have one question that I also like to ask. With flying, you said it's a lot of hours, it's a lot of money. Is it about the passion? Because when I started, a lot of people were like, oh, you need to have the passion to keep you in the game. And others are like, no, I'm just getting in for the pay. Is it a rewarding industry? Is it something that you suggest for anyone to just get in? Please, this I can open it up for both Nyasha and Palesa.
Sure. I think that's the most important question, actually, of all the questions that you've asked. Aviation requires a lot of passion. It is rewarding in the context of the fulfillment that you gain from becoming a pilot, and from, in my context, being able to teach somebody else to become a pilot. In terms of finances, initially, I don't even want to lie to you, initially it's financially not rewarding. Initially, it's almost strenuous. You start to question yourself. You start to question if you should continue, particularly at this phase that we're experiencing now, the coronavirus, where things are getting smaller. People are not able to afford the luxuries that they used to afford. People are not coming in to do intro flights just for the sake of it as much as they used to before. So it is exceptionally important that you are very passionate, because it does become long hours. Even within the airline, I've spoken to a lot of airline pilots who have told me that sometimes you have to be at work to take off at 5 in the morning. That means you have to be at work at 4 a.m. And that means you have to leave your home, wherever it is that you're living, at around 3 to make sure that you're able to sign on at 4 in the morning. Important thing to note is that for every flight school, doesn't matter where you go, you must be there an hour before your flight lesson. So if the takeoff time is given as 8 o'clock, that means you have to be there at 7 in the morning. Now, understanding the fact that it's a time constraint environment will help you as well in determining whether you genuinely want to do it or not. Because you find some students say to me, I don't like waking up in the morning. Yes, sometimes it becomes difficult to wake up in the morning, but on those days where you're struggling, it's the passion that drives you. It's the desire to actually be in the sky that keeps you going. It's the desire to actually be in an aircraft and handle the aircraft on your own that keeps you going. On the months where the salary is not as amazing as you would have liked it to be, it's genuinely the passion that keeps the drive going. It's the passion that keeps you saying, you know what, I love what it is that I'm doing, and I'm not going to stop simply because there's been a bit of challenges along the way. Even with respect to the actual training, sometimes you find yourself in a glitch where, you know, you had planned a certain amount of money and you'd made a budget, and so you had technically prepared for your flight training, but there's always shortfalls, and you discover you didn't plan correctly, you didn't plan as much as you would have liked, or you discover there's a section of training that you're struggling with, which might require a few more extra lessons for you to do. Those are the days where you definitely need the passion, because if you're not passionate and you're not driven about aviation, on those days where you discover that you're not financially equipped to actually continue, you start to wonder, do I really want to do it? And on those days, it's the passion that keeps you going. It's the passion that says, you know what, I really genuinely adore this thing that I'm doing, and I don't see myself not actually participating in it. And like Kodani's question was very valid in the sense that, are you able to do it just for the money? I do not believe that is the case, because it requires, even after you get your commercial pilot's license, there's things like getting a rating. In order for you to fly a specific aircraft, you need to do training to get to be able to fly that aircraft, and that requires money as well. So it's not just about the financial gains, definitely in the long run, once you become military wise, but in the interim, while you're still trying to get your way to the top, under circumstances where you're financially unable to maintain just your daily base flight training, if the passion is not there, it can become very easy to just give up and throw in the towel.
That is so, so true, Palesa. Thanks for that. Nyasha, any add-ons?
She spoke about almost everything. I also just love the network. I love the passion that's around. If you meet anyone who's flying, it's like we're all related in a way. It doesn't take much. Just meet 5 pilots in one room. Oh my word! You just click from then. I'm very grateful for the friendships that you meet along the way. It's just amazing. It's just so uniform. Everyone, you just click. That's one thing I've noticed. I've never met pilots who are like, I don't like this pilot. It's just, we all just click. It's like this one big family, and that's driven by the same, there's just this force. I can't explain it. You have to be in it to understand. And it's amazing that you'll find a pilot who's not able to fly. Maybe he last flew 3 to 5 years ago, but he can't continue because he doesn't have money. But he still loves it. He'll still tell you about his first flight or her first flight, and it's just, yeah. And you'll find I've seen pilots who actually, there are lots of sacrifices that are made by pilots. Even with no money, they'll leave their families and they'll have to go to the bundu out there to work. So maybe they can earn flight hours, they can get flight hours. They're in the middle of nowhere earning peanuts. But the passion, I don't know, it just drives you. It just keeps you going, keeps you going, keeps you going. So yeah, I'm still to hear of another field that's as fulfilling, that it lets you just, it drives you from within. It's like you don't even have food or what, but you're like, oh, I'll just go fly. So yeah, it's really, really worth it. Anyone thinking about it, I'd be like, you know what? This is it. You need to just try. Even just go for that intro flight, that 30-minute flight, and yeah, everything else will be history.
Thanks, Nyasha, for that refreshing point of view. I have to agree. There's just a click about pilots and aviators, even the drone pilots, and those are just enthusiasts. It's just that knowledge. And for me, I think it's the dynamic of flying. You know, when you just elevated from ground level, everything changes, your perspective changes. It's so rewarding. Like before a flight, sometimes you might have maybe a bad day or not so exciting day, but just get on an aircraft cockpit, fly. You're just gonna be excited. That adrenaline rush, that just whew, that was a good flight. That landing, and landing can do so much for you. A good landing can do so much for you to boost you for the whole week. So I completely agree with you, Yasha and Palesa. And also, I think we've just spoken a bit too much about the peanuts, and it's not so, but there is it can be very rewarding. There's a good number of people like, yes, I'm getting the big check. It's not, maybe the beginning stages may be a bit of sacrifices. You have to maybe become this and that, like um bush pilots. I don't want to name bush pilot or instructor, whatever, to insinuate that they don't get paid. Trust me, they do get paid. But then there are other kind of pilots also who are happy. So we don't want to throw numbers or say, oh, this one's getting a big paycheck, and throw the title of the pilot, but it is a very rewarding at the end of the day, right? Yes. So I think, gonna say something, Yasha?
I was just agreeing to what you were saying.
Yes. So it's not all gloomy and you're going to suffer to become an aviator. No, it can be very rewarding as well. I think we've covered I think we have a question coming through. I think we'll take two more questions. I finished ground school. I was doing flight dispatch. Okay, I'm just gonna read this out loud for Palesa Onyasha. This Bravo Charlie says, hello, excuse me, I would like to know, my dream is to fly. Currently, I have finished my ground school. I was doing flight dispatch and operation, and I will be doing my license exam soon. When I will start my PPL, do I have to sit for ground school again, or may I directly complete my hours? I understand. Okay, I think I understand Charlie Bravo to be saying they're done with ground school and are starting with their exams. When they join the flight school, will they be then required to redo the ground school? Please just take it with that, Palesa.
Hi, Bravo Charlie. No, not at all. If you've already attended a ground school and you're happy with the knowledge that you've obtained, the next step would be to start writing your exams, of which you can write exams at the same time that you start your flying. So once you've enrolled at a flight school, what we'll need obviously from you is your student pilot's license and your medical exam, and we can immediately start your flight training. So there won't be a need for you to attend another ground school if that's already happened and you're already ready to write your exams.
I hope that answered your question. Thanks, Palesa. Thanks for the question, Charlie. Bravo. Bravo, Charlie. Didn't catch it. And that was our session for today. Thank you so much. On a Saturday morning, just to connect with us and be a part of this amazing opportunity that FlyFOFA gave us to hear from a flight school. Because usually it would be Nyasha and I would have a panel, but having and flight school join us, it's really amazing. And we got almost, if not all our questions answered. And please send emails to, we've shared African Leaders 100 at gmail.com. And Palesa, which email can they use to inquire about your training?
They can use admin@flyfofa.co.za. I don't know if I'll be able to type it on here. Yes, I think I can. They can use admin@flyfofa.co.za. They can check out our website as well, and they can also email me directly, palesa@flyfofa.co.za. They can also check out our Instagram page as well as our Facebook page to get further information or further details.
Awesome. Thank you again to everyone. Please stay connected to African Leaders in Aviation social media. We'll have more webinars, especially with regards to how to get the scholarships. The scholarships are available. I think that will be a very exciting one and very beneficial to those who really want to get going with their training. Anything else before I sign out from Nyasha?
Thank you very much, Palesa and FlyFOFA, for hosting this today. Really, really appreciate it. I've learned a lot as well. And I'm happy there's a recording so we can actually just feature this on the page and get the information out there. And thank you to everybody else who zoomed in today on a Saturday morning, as Palesa said. But thank you. Thank you, Kodani.
Thank you, and have a lovely day, everyone. Palesa, again, for your time, your energy, your information, highly appreciated. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
By the way, do you do pilot coaching?
Wow.
Pilot coaching.
I've never heard of pilot coaching. Can you give me an explanation what pilot coaching would be? I might actually start doing it.
There are some people who are in business, right? Then you have someone who's like understanding you on how to become a successful business person. You can go to a business school, but for you to run an effective business, you need to go for some mentorship programs, something like that. Is there any prospects of having that from FlyFOFA, from Palesa, from Nyasha, or from Kodani?
Well, from my side, now that I've been exposed to it and now that I'm aware of it, I'll definitely look into it, and I'll definitely share that information with the owners of the company. Sounds like actually a brilliant idea to actually get pilot coaching, like you're saying. I'll definitely raise that with the owners of the company and perhaps myself as a side hustle.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because why I raised it is like from the introduction of FlyFOFA, you said it's more of an African school with African solutions. So, that also comes with a sense of like maybe we have been let down on some of the privileges, and there are people who need like to be cranked up. You need to coach them. You need to indoctrinate them on the principles that are involved in flying. So that's why I just read that question. Thank you.
Yes, Kadio, you've got such a very, very highly valid point. The way you've even stated it is something that's actually close to my heart on a personal level, where we're not exposed as much as other people are to especially the aviation industry. And perhaps if we had the ability to expose more and more people to the industry, like you're saying, through pilot coaching, then it makes it easier and it makes it less of a scary environment, of which I think a lot of people currently are more afraid of coming into the industry, rather than it is that they lack the exposure. So if there's more exposure out there, then definitely I think it makes the world of a difference in terms of allowing people to know that this is a possibility that actually exists for them, and not just for a certain caliber of person.
Thank you so much for that Q&A. Really, that was a different perspective. Pilot coaching, interesting. For me, I hadn't considered that, but something that I'll definitely be looking into. Not sure if Nyasha also has anything else to add to that question.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Palesa, no? I mean, Nyasha, no?
No, not at this moment, Cody.
Okay. Thank you to all. I see everyone saying thank you. It's more than a pleasure. This is what we're here for. This is what African Leaders is about. FlyFOFA, African solutions for African problems. Again, thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Are you ending the meeting?
Yeah, I'll end it now.